Pennsylvania Association of School Board Officials.
If I can I'll just do a quick introduction. Mr. Jay Himes has a very timely presentation, and I'm disappointed. I mean, obviously because of the weather, he can't make it. We wanted Mr. Himes to go first because he was going to present sort of a school finance 101 presentation to kind of kick off the budget process for the board and for the public. He's still going to give that presentation. It's an excellent one. We're hoping we can get him here next month, but Aaron has agreed to jump in with some information here, and if you don't mind, I'll chime in a little bit as well. That's all right with you.
So we're getting started. Obviously, we're asking you to approve a preliminary budget today, and so in order to do so, we're going to review a little bit of the preliminary budget as well as our revenue and expenditures. A lot of these revenue slides may look familiar, as I did present some of those a couple months back, but we figured let's revisit this as we continue to move forward in our budget process. So again, this, I'm not sure why that's value, but we've been stating all along that we rely heavily on our local resources. So these do tie to our budget, our preliminary budget numbers. As you can see here, roughly about 67% of our total budget is locally driven. State average is about 59%. The local average is about 40%. If we look at here for our projected revenues, we know that 67%, as I just stated, is locally driven. Of that, 54% is our real estate taxes. We rely heavily on our real estate taxes as compared to the state average or the local, some of the other local districts in our area. We continue to move around here. 8% of our local Act 511, that's our earned income tax, local service tax, some other taxes. Moving on to the state, you can see that our basic education only makes up 14% of our total revenue. State other, which would be included in here, is our reimbursement back for PSERS, FICA, as well as transportation. So how do we stack up against the state average, those in the IU, or even local or not local, but other cohorts, districts that have the same household income or unemployment rate as Mill Creek? As you can see here, this bottom line represents the IU. The red line represents Mill Creek, the green line represents the state average, and the black line represents our cohorts. As you can see, this is total local revenue per student. We generate more local revenue per student as compared to the IU by about 26-30, but yet again less than the state average and less than our cohorts. Let's move on to understanding a little bit about our state funding. Our state funding is driven primarily, not exclusively, but by our market value aid ratio as well as our personal income ratio. I don't expect you to really understand this, but it is important to mention these as they do drive our subsidies. If you have a higher market value or higher personal income, that means your market value aid ratio is going to be lower. So let's take a look at our market value personal income aid ratio. As you can see here, red is Mill Creek, black is our cohorts, gray is the IU average. So what does that mean in terms of our state subsidy? Well, let's try to take a look at giving you an example here of our Act 126 formula. I don't really expect you to really understand all this either, as there's many layers to this formula, but you can see down here at the bottom. You have your equalized millage multiplier, which I'll explain here in a little while, but your market value aid ratio. As I mentioned, if your aid ratio is lower, that means less subsidy as compared to if it was higher. So let's take a look at our total state revenue per student. As I mentioned, we have a lower aid ratio, so in turn, we actually receive less state aid as compared to our cohorts, the state average, or compared to the IU average. Moving on, let's take a look at this at our basic ed subsidy, because the basic ed subsidy is really the only subsidy we receive from the state that is not tied to an expenditure. As you can see here, it follows the same trend. we receive less than our cohorts, the state average, or the IU average. Moving on to our federal funds. As you can see here, we do receive a little bit more federal funds as compared to our cohorts, but less than the state as well as the IU. So let's take a look at our total revenue per student. As we said, that we rely heavily on our local resources. We also receive less state aid than compared to the IU or our cohorts or the state average. What's that look like? We generate less revenue per student as compared to the three groupings. Let's take a look, as I mentioned, we talked about the equalized mill. The equalized mill is a standardized millage calculated by dividing a school district's total taxes collected and remitted by its total market value as certified by the Pennsylvania State Equalization Board. We can only control our local taxes, which does, for us, is about 53% of our total budget. The state funding model is based on a district's ability to generate local revenue to offset the need for a state subsidy. So let's take a look at our equalized mill. What this really is trying to say where our tax rate is compared to other districts. Our tax rate, again, we're red, we're below even those in the average of the IU, the state average, and our cohorts. As I mentioned before, we actually receive less state funding than these, which is driving primarily why our total revenue per student is lower compared to these other districts. So let's take a look further into our real estate tax rate itself. As you can see here, this is our real estate taxes over the last 10 years. We've raised taxes 5 times in the past 10 years. Let's move on and see the impact of not raising taxes. This is a BDO slide that they had presented back a year or 2 ago, and I wanted to continue to use this slide. So as you can see here, in the 2009-2010 year, the district did not raise taxes. What did that mean? The district lost out on about $1.7 million that year. The following year, in 2010, 2011, the district did raise taxes, which generated about $1.1 million. The following year after that, the 11-12 year, the district didn't raise taxes, which the district didn't generate about $1.2 million. This doesn't just impact that 1 year. There's a compounding effect to this. So if we move down here to the bottom, first year, it ties, 1.7 million, 1.7 million. The second year, the district did raise taxes, but still didn't make up the ground that it would have received should it raise taxes to the index from the 9-10-11 year, or the 9-10 year. The third year, the district didn't raise taxes, so it was out actually at the end of the third year, about $2 million. For a total over 3-year span, $4.5 million. Let's move on and take a look at this in a different model, or a line graph. As you can see here, it's the same concept. As you can see, that the district will continue to lose revenue. Looking at this, if taxes are not raised or remain steady, we would remain flat here. The potential continues to climb. Let's take a look at our fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. You can see here, back in 2008, we did have a healthy fund balance, and we are comparable compared to the other districts that we've been benchmarking ourselves against the entire presentation. Over time, we've continued to decline. We do have a fund balance policy that does state that we want to achieve 8% of our total expenditures. We're currently sitting at the end of this year, 2.5%. What kind of impact does this have? If we ever wanted to issue any debt, this could have an impact towards that. So moving on to our expenditures. Well, taking a look at our projected expenditures, 44% of our total expenditures is driven by salaries. Then you have your 4% FICA, 13% PSERS, your medical, another 1% medical, which is your dental, your vision. About 73% of our total budget is driven by personnel. 7% debt, 4% transportation, that leaves 15% for us to really control. Let's take a look at our increased expenditures without even looking at any salary increases at all. Our PSER